You have been called upon to serve. You will be trained and you will become the best we can make of you. You will be the protectors of Earth and all her colonies. Dr. Catherine Halsey, Halo, The Fall of Reach. One unbreakable shield against the coming darkness. One last blade forged in defiance of fate. Let them be my legacy to the galaxy I conquered and my final gift to the species I failed. Attributed to the Emperor of Mankind. I'm here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and I'm all out of... Oh, forget it. Random Marine, StarCraft 2, Wings of Liberty. Heavily armed, heavily armored, and boasting enough guts to outweigh an entire battleship, the Space Marine is a very common trope found throughout science fiction literature, video games, comics, and animated films. Tasked with boarding and possibly capturing enemy spaceships, leading armed forces when landing on an alien planet in order to establish a beachhead, or simply just serving as thorns, large and perhaps even poisonous ones at that, in the sides of space pirates or the enemies of mankind in general, it is rare to see any work that takes place in space without them. Today, they have become quite a popular trope as science fiction and action films and shows are all the rage. This video will be my attempt at cataloging them and introducing them all to those unfamiliar with science fiction, particularly the space opera genre. Hi, hello, and welcome again everybody to another episode of Natural Juan. This time around we're going to discuss a common trope found in science fiction, specifically space opera, the Space Marine, who are iconic for their bulky armor, devastating weaponry, and, as one character from StarCraft 2 might say, damn fool courage. Before that though, I'd like to invite you all to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications. Special shout out too to Mr. Jonathan Green, my patron in Patreon. Also, here's another shout out to team lead Donald Zanders, whose appearance sometimes reminds me of Horace Lupercal from Warhammer 40,000. Anyway, if you guys would also like to support my channel and what I do here, you'll find my Patreon, PayPal, and Gcash information in the description below. Alright, lock and load everybody and make sure your powered armor is on right as we shoot off into space with Space Marines. To start with, the terminology Space Marine is actually a misnomer, as space isn't really an ocean. However, since movies like Star Wars and shows like Star Trek portray spaceships like their ocean-going vessels and even call groups of them fleets, it's little to no surprise that soldiers, or military men in general, who are the first to land on planets or engage in hostile boarding actions against enemy starships, are associated with or are portrayed similarly to modern-day military equivalents on the open sea, like the United States Marine Corps, the Royal Marines of the United Kingdom, and the landing forces of Russia. As a matter of fact, as a kind of trivia, there was quite a bit of controversy when author M.C.A. Hogarth published a web serial novel called Spots the Space Marine, and then multimedia giant Games Workshop, creator of Warhammer 40,000, had pulled it from Amazon for copyright infringement. After much debate and negotiation, it was decided that the term Space Marine could not be trademarked by any company or organization, as it had been a term that had been coined for more than half a century, something that Games Workshop had no real counter to. Needless to say, Spots the Space Marine was placed back on Amazon, and the rest is pretty much history. Anyway, as a brief history, Space Marines got their start in stories written by Bob Olson, with titles like Captain Brink of the Space Marines and the Space Marines and the Slavers. It featured the titular Captain Frank Brink, who was, surprise surprise, a Space Marine who fought off a variety of monsters and dangers for humankind. Take note that these stories were written for a magazine called Amazing Stories back in the years of 1932 to 1936, somewhere before World War II, and its horrors came and brought with it many new ideas that were both innovative and terrible. In the years between 1934 to 1954, a new series of stories written by Edward Elmer E.E. Smith called Lensman came to prominence. These stories featured heroes bedecked in powered armor who served a variety of roles from space police to armed forces. In case you're curious, the lens described in the stories as in lensman is actually a device that grants its wearer psychic powers. Of course, all these tropes would come to a head when author Robert Heinlein wrote the novel Starship Troopers. While his powered armored soldiers are actually called mobile infantry, they codified the concept of space marines for generations to come, being troops transported through space and sent on battles to establish a foothold in enemy territory. This novel would go on to be adapted into a 1997 film that sadly lacked many of the original's merits, such as powered armor and the fact that the protagonist, Juan Rico, was probably a Filipino. The concept of Space Marines would be further popularized by video games, starting with the first-person shooter Doom, which featured a Space Marine as its main protagonist. In this game, you play as an unnamed Space Marine who must fight through horde after horde of demons who have somehow invaded real space. Players have nicknamed this Space Marine as Doom Guy, as he appears to be the same character who appears throughout the series. This would later be confirmed in its most recent installment, Doom Eternal. Then of course there would be the tabletop game Warhammer 40,000, which codified the concept of Space Marines in other media. That of superhuman warriors wearing powered armor and wielding lethal armaments that could kill crowds of people with just a few rounds. Again, as mentioned above, Space Marines are not copyrighted terms, but be careful of other terms that Games Workshop might use in their various games. StarCraft, created by Blizzard, who's also famous for creating other games like Warcraft and Diablo, would further popularize Space Marines worldwide. Indeed, when StarCraft became a pastime in South Korea, ideas of high-tech soldiers grew in popularity even more, what with Japan already leading the way with its science fiction shows. What makes this even more noteworthy is that there is a lingering rumor that Blizzard initially intended StarCraft to be an adaptation of Warhammer 40,000, which was turned down by Games Workshop. Anyway guys, I suppose you're wondering why I'm bringing all this talk of Space Marines up. Well, aside from being a tribute to the Space Marine genre in general, this is also an announcement video for what I have in mind next. See, for a while now, I have been viewing and listening to a lot of narrations on YouTube, especially the Witch Hunter saga on Audio Epics. Really, you guys should check out their channel as it's quite an amazing work of fantasy heavily inspired by Warhammer Fantasy. Much like what I have planned, while it has some resemblance to Games Workshop's creations, it is an original franchise with its own setting, characters, and merchandise. What I actually have planned is a series of science fiction action horror narrations entitled The Space Marine Saga, which features an unassuming protagonist thrown into adventures that are way in over his head. Assisted by an alien symbiont that regulates his metabolism, heals his injuries, and provides him with a warning for danger, and a suit of powered armor that protects him from harm and grants him limited flight and enhances his combat capabilities, our Space Marine will face everything from greedy but dumb aliens, well-dressed killer robots, man-eating chickens, and extra-dimensional horrors that can best be described as demons. The project is already underway and I really hope to see you soon once I finish the first introductory videos for the series. This is more or less another experimental series and I want to know your input if you would indeed like to tune into this kind of thing, and whether or not you'll enjoy a genre that is more or less a mix of science fiction, horror, action, and fantasy all rolled into one. Like I mentioned earlier, while it may bear some resemblance to other Space Marines in other franchises, specifically Warhammer 40,000, this will be a completely original series and will likely have more in common with Dean Koontz's Odd Thomas novel series than Games Workshop's futuristic tabletop wargame. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Natural Juan. If you enjoyed the video and would like to see more like it, please feel free to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications. If you would like to support my channel and what I do here, don't forget to check out the description below where you'll find my Patreon, PayPal, and Gcash information. Natural Juan deploying into the field. Ah! Why can't I get out of this chicken shit outfit? Help!